Hey everybody, welcome to week 17 of Mythic Monday, where we look at Mythic Plus through the eyes of healers. We got some big shakeups in the meta to talk about this week. We're going to talk dungeon difficulty, next week's affixes, and the random thought of the week. We're going to talk about the pre-made groups filter add-on. It's going to help you guys find pug groups that are going to dominate keys. So let's get into it. Okay, so I know it's not perfect, but I use sub-creation to make these videos every week because it does give us an idea of which specs are timing the highest keys, and from week to week it gives us a nice picture of the different directions specs are trending in, and I've been doing these videos since week 1 of Dragonflight. So what's really interesting about this week is that it's the first week of the season where no spec is in the S tier, and more specifically, the first week where Resto Druid and Preservation Evoker were not alone in the S tier, and obviously this is a result of the 10.0.7 changes. In fact, for some of those weeks there wasn't even any specs in the A tier because the gap between those specs and the rest of the field was so wide. Resto Shaman is unquestionably on the rise with recent buffs and talent changes, but the really coolest thing is that we can see the gap between most of the healing specs has closed dramatically. Disc Priest has been performing well since the 10.0.5 changes, and now with the latest patch we have Holy Paladin right there with it. So while balance is never going to be 100% perfect in a game like this, it feels like we're in a place where 5 of the 7 healing specs are being played a lot in the highest keys, and it's worth noting that this week key levels 22 to 28 are being represented here. Healer balance is in the best place it has been all expansion long, hands down, but one thing we should watch out for is the continued rise of Resto Shaman. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Resto Shaman take a solo place in the S tier before 10.1. Reminds me a little bit of what happened to Holy Priest in Season 3 and 4 of Shadowlands. An undertuned spec gets repeatedly buffed, and at some point a line is crossed and they just become insane. Shaman also has the added benefit of being an absolute beast in pug groups because of their ability to interrupt and stop so many casts. So what about Holy Priest and Mistweaver? You have to admit that Subcreation simply places specs that don't get much play super low, usually lower than they deserve. Whatever priest spec is not flavor of the month is also very low on the list all the time because of the priest population flocks to the better specialization, so it's hard to get a good handle on where Holy really is at. On the other hand, WoW players will flock to a spec that is good and gets the job done, so we need to consider that as well. Because of all that, Holy Priest gets a bit of a pass for being one of the 2 healing specs on the same class. But that's not the case with Mistweaver, and after yet another series of buffs that a lot of people, myself included, thought would finally see it take off, how is it that it still winds up at the bottom? You can make a case that Monk is, in general, one of the less popular classes for players, but if Mistweaver slapped, I guarantee the bandwagon would fill up. When Shaman, Disc Priest, Paladin got their buffs, we literally saw instant improvement on their performance in high keys, and I'm kind of at a loss at this point why Monk just can't seem to move the needle. Monk has a lot going for it in 10.1 that seems to suggest Blizzard is really trying to get Mistweaver back on the map, but will Mistweaver mains overdose on Hopium before the patch is even released? So every week I go over the dungeon difficulty tier list, and to be honest, there's very rarely any changes to it after the first month or so of the expansion, but you have to also remember this represents players in keys from 22 to 28, which does not represent most of the WoW population, more like the top 5 to 1%. So this week I wanted to do something a little different. On the left is the Subcreation dungeon difficulty tier list for the week, and on the right is my personal tier list for the dungeons I've actually pugged throughout the week on various tunes at a variety of keys levels. I think for general pug groups, AV would actually be a lot lower. Almost every group attempts the whelp skip these days, but in my recent experience, a lot of them don't have the coordination and CC to actually make it worth it, so I would place AV on the lower end for the general WoW population at large. I feel like a lot of groups would be better off attacking the dungeon with the traditional route. Also, Ruby Life Pools has got to be an absolute pug slaughter dungeon. I could see how a higher end coordinated group can succeed in here, but its damage going out is very predictable. But my experience in pugs, not to mention some of our most ridiculous pug groups on stream, seem to have all been in this dungeon, so I'd place it a lot lower as well. The only other one I'd argue for that general players might be a little different is that Algathar is actually not as difficult if you aren't doing a super high-end tyrannical key. The bird boss, which can do obscene damage at high keys, won't be lethal to most mid-range key pushers at 4 stacks, and as long as you're not getting one-shot by that mechanic, you should be able to survive the fight. While it's no walk in the park, I think the player base at large, AA, probably is not F tier. Next week's affixes are Fortified, Bolstering, Storming, and Thundering, so since this is a mostly healer audience, we don't really have to worry because Bolstering is a DPS affix, right? Bolstering is a DPS affix because you're supposed to focus down the most dangerous targets so they don't wipe the group. Anyway, have fun with that. And joking aside, it's pretty important that your DPS don't allow the biggest, scariest mobs to get super bolstered because combined with Fortified, they can turn into an absolute nightmare or even just take a really unnecessarily long time to kill. Storming is usually not too much of a hassle. Just remember, it can fudge certain mechanics like Wise Mari's Wash Away Circle Run, and it could be a good idea to intentionally clear some tornadoes ahead of time if you know something's coming that's going to be a problem. Finally, the random thought of the week is a shout out to the pre-made groups filter add-on. I have some non-negotiables when I join higher pug groups, guys, and I'd rather know if a group meets what I'm looking for ahead of time than queue up, join them, and then have to leave because I'm seeing red flags all over the place. For example, I want to make sure I'm always with a Bloodlust, a B-Res, and at least 1, preferably 2 melee DPS if the key's going to pose any difficulty at all. PGR shows me the classes, specs, and the IO rating of the group leader right on the pre-made group screen, which really helps me find groups that I think will go well. I can also filter out groups that have healers, for example, so they aren't shown to me at all. If you're a pug enthusiast like me, this is a really helpful add-on you can find on the Curse website and in the app. So as always, let me know in the comment section what you guys think about the rise of Resto Shaman, the dungeon difficulty, next week's affixes, the pre-made groups filter add-on. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you made it this far, hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe to see more of my content in the future. Check out my stream here on YouTube, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 9 p.m. Pacific. And you want a little bit more information about Resto Shaman, I'm going to float a video somewhere over my head where we have a guide to get you started on Resto Shaman and Mythic Plus. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.